the next session in this series titled COVID-19 and Social Distancing. Are there upsides to time alone? I'm sorry. I am Christine Thompson, the Executive Director of Executive Education at the Smith School of Business, and we are working in partnership with the Smith School's Office of Alumni Relations to power this fantastic series. We would especially like to welcome and thank our Smith and University of Maryland alumni and any current students joining us today from across the world. We appreciate your time and hope you find this a valuable source of learning. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Rebecca Ratner. Dr. Ratner is the Dean's Professor of Marketing at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. She recently also served as the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs for the Smith School. She received a PhD in social psychology from Princeton University and has been a visiting scholar in the marketing departments of Harvard Business School, Chicago's Booth Graduate School of Business, and the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Prior to her position at Maryland, she was assistant professor and associate professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Dr. Ratner has taught courses on consumer behavior, marketing management, marketing for social value, and marketing research to MBA students, undergrads, and executives alike. Professor Ratner's research explores factors underlying suboptimal consumer decision-making and focuses on memory, variety seeking, and the influence of social norms. Her research has appeared in marketing psychology and decision-making journals, including, but not limited to, the Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Marketing Research, Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, the Journal of Experimental Psychology, and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Her research has also been featured in the media, including the New York Times, Washington Post, CBS News This Morning, and NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Professor Ratner has served as associate editor at the Journal of Consumer Research and Journal of Marketing Research, and is also co-editor of the Journal of Marketing Research. I want to personally thank Rebecca for her support of this important webinar series. Before Rebecca begins, I want to ask everyone to please keep your microphones on mute to reduce any background noise. Rebecca will be presenting her material for approximately 25 minutes, and then we will move into a 20-minute approximately question and answer period, which I will help her facilitate. Please post your questions to the chat area, and we will monitor those, and I will address them thematically during our Q&A time. Those are the logistical details, and now I get to turn it over to our very own Dr. Rebecca Ratner. Rebecca, take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you to Exec Ed and Alumni Relations for hosting this webinar series. It's wonderful to be able to sort of connect with all of you and share ideas during this time. As Chris mentioned, the topic for our conversation today is alone time. And in normal times, alone time could entail something like what the woman in this picture is doing, going to an art museum and sort of exploring the art on her own, or it might mean, reading a book at home. But now with the stay-at-home orders that are affecting, so much of our country and affecting people all around the world, alone time increasingly would mean time at home, although of course exercise or a walk at a park at a good physical and social distance is certainly something that people can be doing alone. And the question is, what are people making of this additional time that they might have alone? And are there upsides? Are there sort of potential opportunities to having this alone time? And I know some of you might be thinking, yes, you do have more alone time than usual. And others of you may be thinking, I'm not alone at all because I'm sharing my household with other people. And I think what many of us are doing in those situations is carving out, at least sometimes during the day, where the different members of the household are spreading out a little bit so that each person can at least have some of their own space. So I think for many of us, there is at least some opportunity for time that we could focus on some things for ourselves. Now, of course, this may be a very different story for the huge range of experiences that people are having, where they may not be having much time at home alone for leisure at all. Certainly, workers on the front lines, any individuals who are suffering, serious COVID-19 symptoms. Family members who are grieving alone may not feel that there's sort of any bandwidth for this alone time. People who are currently unemployed, which is, increasing numbers of people. And I just want to make two comments about this. One is that, anybody who is really struggling right now, certainly we encourage that they seek out the many resources that are available. We've listed one here on the slide to reach out and connect and get help. And a second point is that what we're increasingly understanding is how important it is when you're having a difficult time to also be able to take some time for yourself and recharge a little bit, including if what you're then doing is trying to go and help others, serve others. So this is definitely sort of a theme of this conversation, is how can we sort of take some time for ourselves and do the recharging that we need so that we can sort of move forward. And, I think this brings to an important point about sort of like, what do we do with alone time? And I really like this quote. There is a difference between loneliness and solitude. One will empty you and one will fill you. You have the power to choose. And what I like about it, is that it suggests that we can be somewhat proactive about what we do with this kind of alone time that we may have, and whether we can sort of use it as a time to take opportunities to do some things that might be nourishing for you. Okay, so what I'd like to do with you today is to talk briefly about some of my own research and to review 4 key findings from my research that relates to this general topic of sort of me time versus we time. And these topics, the findings relate to what activities people want to do with other people, relate to how much enjoyment we get to activities that we do either alone or with other people, and also relate to how do we perceive other people who do activities on their own versus together with other people. So here's a brief overview of what I'm going to want to talk about with you, and we're going to go into more detail on each of these, but this is a preview. The first point is that what my colleagues and I find is that people are reluctant to engage in leisure activities alone, particularly sort of out and about in public, things like going to that art gallery that you saw the woman doing on her own in that earlier slide. And it's, I think, a missed opportunity that people are not wanting to do certain kinds of activities alone because there are upsides to solo activities. One thing that we find is that engaging in activities alone actually enhances learning. So people can absorb more, let's say, of the content in an art gallery if they're there alone than together with another person. Another thing that we find is that when people do an activity solo, they don't really need to compromise about what that activity is. They can do the activity that they will most enjoy, rather than, when you're trying to find an activity to do with one or more other people, it needs to be an activity maybe that everybody is willing to do, which might mean it's an activity that you yourself are a little bit less excited about. A third benefit from engaging in activities alone is it can actually make you a more effective influencer. So we'll talk about that. So several different upsides to alone time that I want to share with you. Of course, there may be other upsides to alone time as well, but these are the ones from my own research that we're going to talk about today. One thing I want to note in terms of the relevance of all of this for companies or organizations is that it can be useful to them to pull in customers who either would have those experiences, consumption experiences, let's say, alone or with others. So here's an example of the Tate Museum in London, and they are trying to appeal to members of the museum to either come into the exhibit on your own or to come in together with other people. And I think part of what is interesting about what they're doing here is they may also be trying to draw in people to become members of the museum who don't have friends or family members who are particularly interested in art. It's saying, you know, you can join even if you be coming in and enjoying the art by yourself. So definitely a way for organizations to pull in more potentially interested customers if they can pull in people regardless of the extent to which they have friends and family who have the same interests. So to this question of me time versus we time, some of you may be familiar with Robert Putnam's book. This was published about 20 years ago. He called the book Bowling Alone. And as you can see in that figure there on the right, people's engagement in civic activities, Putnam finds, there was a time when people were joining these kinds of things like bowling leagues or Lions clubs, but then it started to really decline. The participation in these group activities declined, and Putnam concluded that what people are doing now is they're not bowling in leagues, but they're bowling alone. And this was quite an interesting question to me. And it takes me to our first point, which is from our research, which is how much are people willing to do these kinds of leisure activities out in public alone? And let me give you an example just to think about for yourself and your own experiences, whether you have ever had times where there's some kind of activity you're interested in. Maybe it's going to a movie that's showing on the big screen, or it's going to a concert, or a show, something that's only in town, you know, this weekend, but you haven't gone because you don't have anyone available to go with you, anyone who happens to be interested in that particular activity or available to do that activity at that particular time. Have you ever had times where you have made the decision to just forego the activity altogether? So that was the question that interested me. It interested me particularly because I found that when I posed this question in my teaching to groups of students, undergrads, MBAs, sort of all levels, I'd always get a lot of hands going up. People saying, yes, I have been in that experience where I've been willing to pay money. I want to do the activity, but I don't do it because basically I don't have, it's almost like I don't have an escort. I don't have a companion. And so my colleague, Rebecca Hamilton, and I started a research project, this was several years ago, where we started to explore this question systematically. And what we did is we asked people a number of different situations. Is this something you would do alone? Is this something you would do together with other people? And what we found is that there were a lot of activities that people were uncomfortable doing if they didn't have company. So we played off of Putnam's book title in the title of our article. We said, people are actually inhibited to bowl, do these kinds of activities alone. And what we found is that this reluctance to do activities alone is quite common. We found it across cultures. We found the effects for men and women. We found it for activities like going to a museum, as you see pictured here, going out to see a movie, going to a restaurant, traveling, going to see a show, lots of kinds of activities that people said that they didn't want to do alone. And when we would ask people, you know, why is it that you aren't gonna go and do these activities if you don't have someone to do the activity with you, we heard a consistent theme. And the theme was, I don't wanna go to do these activities alone because I don't want other people to think who are out, who would see me, you know, in the restaurant or the museum or the movie theater, I don't want them to think that I don't have friends. So that was a recurrent refrain that we heard. And so part of what it meant is that people were saying, it's these leisure activities in public that they don't want to do. They could do the activities sort of at home if other people can't observe them, but they're uncomfortable doing it in public. So for example, people said they don't want to go to a movie in a theater alone, but they would watch a movie at home alone. Or if they were going to a theater, they'd be willing to go on a weekday evening or a matinee on a Sunday, but not in an evening weekend performance because they thought there'd be fewer people there who could see them and make those negative inferences. we found that it was important that these activities be done for fun rather than for some functional purpose. That was what made the activities be the ones that people were afraid of doing alone. So for example, if the activity was something like going to the grocery store, no problem. Most people said that's something they have no problem doing alone. It's done for sort of a functional reason. Or doing work alone, that's fine. So for example, an activity that might seem to be kind of in between of leisure and work is going to a coffee shop. If people were going to a coffee shop and have some work with them, they felt comfortable going by themselves. If they were going to be going to a coffee shop just to enjoy a cup of coffee, that was an activity that they said, that's not something I want to do because people will think if I'm there by myself that I am not socially connected. So an interesting sort of takeaway with regard to this first point that we're making about people's reluctance to do activities alone is that with our current situation with the stay-at-home orders, that public pressure is really gone because there are not a lot of these activities that we can go out and do in public spaces. It is more private spaces at home where we could engage in leisure kinds of pursuits. And so I think it creates kind of an opportunity for people to pursue some things that they wouldn't have pursued in a situation where they would be sort of out and about in the world. So now let's turn to the next key finding, which relates to sort of these first of the benefits that people can get when they engage in activities alone. And this first one is that people digest more in the activity that they're engaging in when they're by themselves than when they're with another person. So let's return to this art gallery example. Imagine that you go to a museum, an art museum, and you're in a gallery and you're there either alone, like this person on the left, or you're there with a companion, like these people on the right. The question is, in which case would you learn more about the art, absorb more about the art when you're by yourself or you're there with another person? So the intuition that my colleagues and I had going into our research on this topic was that if you're there by yourself, you can really just focus on the art. You can decide what sequence to go through the rooms in the exhibit, how long to spend on each piece, how much to spend reading about the different pieces of artwork and so on. Whereas if you're there with somebody else, it can be a bit distracting because you don't know how quickly does my companion want to go through the exhibit? Which pieces do they want to look at? Should I walk with them or should I walk separately from them for different parts? So our thought was that it could be distracting sometimes to be there with somebody else, particularly if it's not clear to you what that person wants about how to go about the activity. So let me tell you an example of how we studied this. We actually conducted a study on campus at the University of Maryland in the Stamp Student Union. Some of you may have been to the art gallery. There's a small sort of art gallery in there. And what we did is we approached people who were kind of nearby the entrance to the art gallery, sort of sitting in the areas near where the gallery was. And we asked people either to come in by themselves to explore the art for a few minutes, or to come in with a person they already were there sort of sitting in the student union with. So they were typically with a friend, a family member, a significant other. So that's how we got people in the accompanied condition to come into the museum. And what we did is we let them just go in, explore the art in the gallery. And then when they came out of the gallery, usually about 8 minutes, 10 minutes later, we asked them a series of questions. So we gave them a surprise memory quiz where we asked them questions about the images themselves in the gallery, but also some of the written descriptions, information that was in the written descriptions about the art pieces. We asked them how much they felt they had learned going through the gallery. And we also asked them how clear, those who were there sent in with a companion, how clear it was to them what their partner wanted to be getting out of the experience of being in the gallery. So let me show you a slide with the results. And I will talk you through this. I know there's a lot here. So the panel on the left is the results for the memory quiz. The panel on the right is the results, and these are the average results across the people who were in those experimental groups. On the right, it's the people's, on average, their reports of how much they felt that they had learned about the art as they went through the exhibit. So on the y-axis, on both of these figures, you have sort of learning. So either memory on the left-hand panel or subjective learning in the right-hand panel. And on the x-axis, what you can see in both of these figures is this is people's ratings on a 7-point scale of how clear it was to them what their partner wanted to get out of the experience of being in the exhibit, where higher numbers indicate that they're clearer, that they were clear about what their partner wanted to get out of it. So what you can see is a similar sort of an upward sloping line. The slopes are slightly different, but basically the same pattern of an upward slope, both for the memory quiz results and people's feeling that they had learned a lot during the experience. What you can see is the more people were clear what their partner wanted to get out of the experience, the more they learned about the art. And conversely, when people were not clear, they said they weren't clear what their partner wanted to get out of the experience, that hurt people's ability to absorb the art. So that's consistent with our idea that being together with another person can be distracting and hurt ability to learn. We also wanted to compare the people who went in with another person to the people who went in, who we asked to go in to explore the gallery by themselves. So now I'm going to show you the dotted lines that you'll see in a minute are the average ratings across the solo condition. So you'll see this is a flat line because there was no partner to be clear or unclear about. So this is just showing you sort of the average level of memory performance for the solo person and the average subjective feeling that they had learned for the solo person. And what you can see there, if you look at kind of where the dotted line and the solid line intersect or would intersect in the panel on the right, is that the solo people did pretty well. And they generally did better than the people who were there with somebody else. Particularly compared to the people who were there with someone else who were not clear what their partner wanted to get out of the experience. So what we're finding here is that people can suffer in terms of their ability to focus on the content of an experience when they're with another person. Okay, let's turn now to the next key research finding. The next key finding relates to enjoyment. And the finding here is that people can sometimes derive quite a bit of enjoyment when doing activities alone because they do the activities that they most enjoy. And a related piece is that people are not always anticipating this result. They don't realize that how much they're compromising on enjoyment when they do something with another person. So let me give you an example of something we find is when we ask people, would you prefer to watch a 2-star movie sitting together with your partner? In this particular study, it was romantic partners. Choose to watch a 2-star movie together with your partner, or would you prefer to watch a higher rated movie, a 4-star movie, sitting in a separate space from where your partner is? And what we found is that a lot of the participants said, I want to be with my partner, even though it would be the worst movie. And what people were expecting in those situations is that being next to the partner, being with the partner, would really compensate for the fact that the quality of the movie was lower. But we found that people were wrong about that the quality of the movie really affects people's enjoyment, and that whether or not they're next to the partner doesn't matter as much. And part of what's going on is that people think that during the movie that they will be, reaching out to touch the partner or engaging in nonverbal communication, say a smile or, making eye contact with the partner if they're right next to the partner, but they overestimate the extent to which they'll in fact do that. Because when we ask them after a movie experience, they're saying, yeah, we didn't do so much of that kind of communicating when we were together. We get a related finding in the art gallery context, where we compare people's predictions of enjoyment, solo or accompanied, with actual enjoyment. And as you can see in this figure, people predicted, on their way into a gallery, they thought they'd enjoy it a good bit more if they were together with someone else than if they were solo. But in fact, when we asked them again on their way out of the gallery, the ratings of enjoyment they gave didn't depend on whether they had been there with someone else or whether they had been alone. Okay. So now to the final of the points I wanted to share about benefits from doing activities solo, is that people can become more influential when they engage in an activity solo and tell people about it than when they engaged in the same activity together with someone else. So consider this example. Imagine that you saw one of these two social media posts. We mocked up these posts to look like Facebook posts. We presented them to participants, and the two posts are identical except for just a couple of words. So if you look very closely at the post on the left, you can see that the update that accompanies the photo, those are truffles there, the photo of the truffles, the update says, "Spent the afternoon relaxing by myself making truffles." And in the post on the right, you see an almost identical thing, except it says, "Spent the afternoon relaxing with friends making truffles." And so the question that, that we pose to participants in our studies is, what do you make of this? What do you make of this post? And how expert do you think the person is who wrote this post on truffle making and chocolates and brands of chocolates? And so what we find is that when people read the post, supposedly written by the person who does this activity by him or herself, that people think that person is really into truffles, interested in truffles, knowledgeable about truffles, and then it leads the people who see the post to say, I want to hear this person's recommendations related to truffles and candy and brands of chocolate. Whereas when they look at the post written by someone who says they engaged in the activity together with friends, there's some ambiguity. It's not clear. Did the person engage in that activity with friends because they're really into truffles in particular, or because they wanted to do an activity with friends and truffle making happened to be an activity that one of the other friends wanted to do? And so that ambiguity leads people to be less clear about whether that person is really interested in the truffles. They think the person has less knowledge, accumulated knowledge about truffles, and they're less interested in taking that person's recommendations. We find similar things in other domains, so watching of movies and exercise. So for example, we find that twice as many people chose to watch a movie trailer that was recommended by someone who sometimes goes to movies in the theater alone, rather than choosing to watch a trailer of a movie recommended by someone who goes to movies in the theater together with other people, always. And likewise, we found that people were more interested, in this case, 4.5 times as many people said they wanted to get workout tips from someone who prefers to exercise alone than to get exercise tips from someone who prefers to exercise with friends. And it's driven by similar effects as what we saw with the chocolate truffles, that they think the person who does these activities solo is more into the activity domain and more knowledgeable about movies, more knowledgeable about exercise if they do those activities alone than with other people. So what you can see is people can actually be a significant influencer if they do activities alone and tell people about it. Okay, so in conclusion, what we are finding in our research is that people exhibit quite a bit of reluctance to engage in leisure activities alone, particularly those activities that are out in public. And we think it's a missed opportunity because there are a number of things that people can get out of engaging in activities by themselves, including greater learning from whatever the activity is that they're doing. For example, learning about the art in a gallery. They can get more enjoyment out of the activity because they're not compromising, and it can make them a stronger influencer as well. So definitely some upsides to alone time. So I certainly would be recommending to anybody to be taking advantage of this alone time now. or alone time sort of at any point later to think about what are things you want to do, what are things you want to learn about or pursue. Maybe it's learning a language, taking a virtual tour anywhere in the world, maybe to learn to cook some new kind of recipes on your own, and to tell people about it as well, because you can influence what they do. All right, so thanks very much. Chris, with that, I think I turn it back to you for our Q&A time.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. Fascinating. I feel like an art museum is in my future. Perhaps
Definitely.
truffles first. So we're waiting for our participants to post some questions, but we have some that have been generated elsewhere. And so taking your 4 points of research and understanding from you that the individual influencer has has great influence over perhaps groups, certainly the friend group, can you translate that to an organization where we're thinking about an individual recommendation versus a team recommendation, or perhaps a committee recommendation, and help us think through how your research applies to the organizational level and recommendations from individuals versus teams, or any other team-like group, like a committee or a board or something like that?
Now that is a very interesting question. And it's part of what I think is interesting about our observation that solos can be influential. What you're raising is also something that sort of, it taps into a different literature, a different research literature, scholarly research that's on something called descriptive norms. And what that literature says is that when more people endorse a thing, they're going to be more influential than if fewer people endorse the same thing. So I think in terms of your interesting example, having a team or a group within an organization endorse something is going to tend to be more influential than just having one person endorse it. So I think that is I'm glad, I appreciate you raising it. I mean, that's a case where definitely sort of the more people who can say, we believe this is good for you to do, that's going to shape behavior. What we're talking about is particularly this sort of ambiguity that happens when a person has done it, sort of an activity, and you don't know why they've done it. And I think that ambiguity is probably less likely to emerge in the team, because they'll probably think that even if not everybody in the team endorses the view, that at least it's more than one person in the team endorse the view if they're gonna make kind of a public recommendation.
Thank you. That's helpful to know. It sounds like webinar number 2 for you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question, so I'm going to read it verbatim to make sure I get it right. Is there a correlation between number of participants and the fact that the event is more memorable? For example, does the number of people involved in an event make it more or less memorable?
I'm wondering whether the person might be thinking here about the event in a broader sense, not just memory, for example, for the content like of the art in a gallery, but more like, would your overall afternoon at the museum be more memorable if there's more people than fewer people? That's interesting. I do think that some people have done research and find that social experiences themselves overall tend to be memorable. But part of the reason for that is that things people do together with others tend to be experiences, interesting experiences, rather than just material consumption. So some of you may be familiar with some of the research on this that shows, for example, that people derive more enjoyment from experiences than material goods. Well, people tend to engage in experiences more together with other people, kind of consistent with our first point. Part of it is that people are reluctant to engage in experiences alone. We think that's a mistake, that people should try to overcome that reluctance. So I think to the person's question, yes, I think there could be some ways in which an experience can be more memorable when there are more people. But I suspect that if any of us went and took time to go to a museum alone and explore the exhibit alone, I think you would not forget you had done that. I myself have an experience like that, the day that my colleague Rebecca Hamilton and I started this research project, I had gone by myself to see a matinee of a theater production, a local theater. And it was the first time I'd ever gotten myself to do it. And I was very pleased with myself that I sort of overcame this inhibition to go and do the activity alone. But it was a terrific experience being at the play, but it was also just very liberating. So I think it can also be memorable to do those things that are experiences on our own.
That makes sense, and understand the differences between that that you explained. Thank you. Another one, which is interesting given our current health environment. We've all had some time to adjust to being more comfortable with being alone. How do you hold on to this feeling and this comfort when our lives become busy and engaged again, which we all hope for very soon? What would you say to that?
Right. Yeah. Interesting question. I would think the first step there is to be noticing how much enjoyment or feelings of being recharged that you can get from these things that you pursue on your own. So I think the first thing is just to notice the benefits you get from it. And then I think the second thing is having in mind that those are valuable benefits, to make a commitment that when things are busier and there's more opportunity for social interaction, is to be able to say, I'm sorry, I'm not available. I'm already booked. You don't need to tell them what you're booked doing, but you certainly could. Our research suggests they may be impressed at certain things that if it's an activity, sort of an interest that you're pursuing on your own. And I would say that some of this even extends now. I know that for some of us, when we look at our weekends, they are starting to get booked as well with Zoom friends get-togethers or Zoom family gets-togethers. And so I think it can be important even during this time to be able to sometimes say no, so that you're not sort of overcommitted with these social engagements and not having the time you need just to sort of relax and do something for yourself.
Great, thank you. Yep, I think the personal and work calendars are melding, aren't they?
Mm.
Yeah. Another great question for you. Did your research findings hold true across different generations? For example, baby boomers were known as the social generation, but they are more likely to go solo than millennials or current generation. Perhaps you saw some indices there.
Yeah, that is really interesting. We found that our effects held regardless of age, although some of our studies had mostly younger participants, like college age participants, but we did do a study in another art gallery that is walking distance to the Smith School building, is in the Marriott, or the Global Campus, I think is now called, has an art gallery. And we sent participants into that gallery, and those were more older adults because it was people who were staying at the hotel for a conference or for some kind of a family event or some kind of a university alumni event. And so they came through our study, and they were older. And we found similar effects. And, I actually think it's quite interesting, the implications of our work for older adults, including people who in their younger years might have had a companion who could be an activity partner, but then later in life they may not have that companion anymore. And I've certainly heard from older sort of people who are now alone and really find the research findings useful, because they say, that's what I feel like. I feel like I can't go to a restaurant unless I have a friend. I feel like I can't go out and do these things. And so I think the more that we can try to say to people, look, it's okay. Other people are not going to judge you negatively for it. I think that's really, really positive across generations.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. Again, part of some new books, right?
Yeah.
This question is interesting, and it's asked around sporting events. So how would this concept and your learnings affect sporting events? And perhaps that's any, beyond that, maybe any large gatherings around a particular activity, but sporting events is what this person was asking: football, basketball games, the like.
Right, right. A sports related example that my colleagues and I have talked about a lot is the example of being at a baseball game. I don't know if any of you have been in this sort of situation. Let's say you're at a game, or maybe it's a basketball game, any kind of game really, and you're there with someone else and you don't know how much does that person want to focus on the game. How interested is the person in the game itself versus how much does that person just want to chat about topics unrelated to the game. And my colleagues and I, we haven't investigated the sports context, but we think it would play out very similarly to the art gallery context that we have studied, where people who are watching a game solo, maybe it's, on TV rather than at the game, but watching it solo, that if you're into the game, if you really are, a basketball fan, or you're the baseball fan, that watching it solo, you may be able to attend more to the content than if you're there with someone else who's not interested. Now, of course, some of you may be thinking, all my friends who I would see a game with are as hardcore fans as I am. And you're probably safe there, because it probably is clearer to you there that what your companion wants to do is primarily focus on the game.
That makes sense. Especially in these days where we're not having much of that activity, right? So that makes sense. I'm looking at the time, and as master of the clock, I'm going to suggest that maybe there's any last minute comments that you want to make, Rebecca, to the group, and then we'll close down.
Great. No, I appreciate people's interest. What I have found in talking about my research and writing about it is that this is a topic that resonates with a lot of people. And so it may resonate for you personally, or it might resonate with you for things you've seen in people who work with you or work for you or family members. So I think it's sort of great to sort of be thinking about what are ways we can encourage people both to sort of spend time with others, certainly is important, but also pursue interests of your own. It certainly makes us all more interesting people to have interests of our own that we pursue, and also can help with sort of that recharging during difficult times or any times.
Thank you. An important message in this current environment. So thank you. And a big thank you to everyone here for joining us. The webinar here today has been recorded, and we'll include the slides within the recording and captions. We will let all attendees know when the recording is available so that you can review it and share with colleagues and friends. We look forward to hosting more live webinars in this series later this month. Please keep checking back with us for more webinars, short courses, and other learning opportunities from the Smith School of Business and Executive Education. We give Dr. Ratner a huge thank you for her time today, and thank you from Smith Executive Education and Alumni Relations. We are here to support you in your lifelong learning. Please stay safe, be well, and go Terps.